first sign that something was wrong was the silence. Draconis Prime was never silent. The capital city groaned and hissed at all hours, lava channels running beneath the black stone streets, volcanic vents breathing heat into the lower districts, and the palace itself always alive with the sound of wings and armor and the low reverberant speech of dragons going about the business of an empire. Rael had grown up inside that sound. It was the sound of safety. When it stopped, he was in the east corridor, carrying a scroll he had been asked to deliver to his father's study. He was small for his age, gold-scaled and slim, barely larger than a hound. His wings had not filled out yet. His fire barely managed a candle flame on a good day. He was 12 years old in dragon counting, which made him a child by any standard in the galaxy, and right now he was standing very still in a very quiet corridor, and the scroll was shaking in his claws. The sound that replaced the silence was worse. It was boots, metal on stone, moving fast, and a smell underneath it, sharp and wrong, like burnt copper. Rael knew that smell. His tutors had made him memorize it. Blood. He ran. He did not know where he was running. He turned corners without thinking, moving down and away from his father's chambers, because something in his chest told him going there would be the last thing he ever did. He could hear shouting now, and the crack of heavy bodies striking walls, and something that was not quite fire but close to it, hot and blue, which meant weapons, which meant soldiers, which meant this was not an accident and not a drill. A hand grabbed him from a doorway. He nearly bit it, then he saw the face. It was old Dara, one of his father's scribes, a small brown-scaled female with ink on her fingers who had always slipped him extra fruit at breakfast when no one was looking. Her eyes were very wide and very afraid. "Come," she said, that was all. She pulled him through a door he had never noticed and down a stairwell that smelled of oil and old metal. The palace had bones under it, service paths and loading routes for the machinery that kept the citadel running. Dara knew them. She moved fast for someone her age, and Rael ran to keep up, and neither of them spoke. The loading docks were at the base of the citadel's eastern face. They were loud in a different way, full of the grinding of cargo lifts and the clatter of crates being moved, and for a moment the noise felt like safety again. Then Rael saw the blast doors at the far end beginning to close, and he understood that there was no safety here either, only a closing window. There was a human standing at the checkpoint. Rael had seen humans before, at diplomatic events, at the market districts, occasionally in the lower halls. They were short and soft-looking, and they always seemed faintly out of place on Draconis Prime, like furniture brought in from another house. This one was no different. He was broad-shouldered in a worn coat, with dark hair going grey at the edges and the look of a man who had been waiting too long and was about to say something unfriendly about it. He was holding a cargo manifest and arguing quietly with a dock clerk. Dara did not slow down. She reached the human in 3 steps, grabbed the lapel of his coat, pulled it open, and placed Rael inside it. There was a moment where nothing happened. Rael was pressed against a human ribcage, feeling a heartbeat that was faster than it looked from the outside, and the coat closed around him, and the world went very dark and very warm and smelled like engine oil and something dry that might have been tea. He heard Dara's voice, low and fast, outside the coat. He heard the human make a short sound, not fear exactly, more like a man who has just been handed an invoice for something he did not order. Then he heard the human say to the clerk in a flat and completely ordinary voice, "All right, we done here. I have a delivery window." The clerk said something, the human said something back. There was the stamp of a clearance seal. Then Rael felt movement, walking, boarding ramp. The specific vibration of a cargo hauler's deck plates under his feet filtered through a coat and a stranger's body. The ship lifted. He could tell when they cleared the atmosphere because the quality of the air changed, became recycled and faintly metallic, and the gravity shifted slightly to artificial. Only then did the coat open. The human looked down at him with an expression Rael could not fully read, not afraid, not awed, something more like a man deciding whether he has made a very large mistake. Rael straightened his spine. He pressed the royal signet ring, which Dara had pressed into his claw on the dock, into the human's palm. He said, with as much dignity as a small shaking dragon could manage, I am the heir to the dragon throne. You will take me to the outer reaches. The human looked at the ring. He looked at Rail. He looked at the viewport, where Draconis Prime was already shrinking behind them, and warships were beginning to move across its orbital lanes. My name is Dorian, he said, and I want it on record that this was not my idea. 3 hours into deep space, Rail issued his first formal command. He told Dorian to alter course for the nearest Imperial relay station so that Rail could contact the palace guard and arrange a proper escort. He said it in the tone his tutors had spent years teaching him, the voice of a future king, measured and absolute, with no room in it for the word no. Dorian did not even look up from the navigation board. That station will be controlled by Vayek's people inside 6 hours, he said. We'd be flying into a cage. Rail stared at the back of the human's head. I did not ask for your assessment. I gave you an instruction. You gave me a suggestion, Dorian said. I'm the one flying the ship. This was the moment Rail understood that the galaxy outside the palace operated by completely different rules, and that he did not know any of them. The Belinda Me was not a comfortable ship. It was a working hauler, built for cargo and distance rather than passengers. The crew cabin was small, the seats were bolted down and stiff, and there was a persistent rattle in the overhead paneling that Dorian seemed to have made peace with long ago. Rail sat on a folded equipment bag that the human had placed on the co-pilot's seat without being asked, which was either thoughtful or automatic, and he was not sure which bothered him more. They talked. It was not easy talking. Rail asked questions in the way he had been taught, which was with authority. Dorian answered in the way he had apparently always operated, which was with honesty and no particular interest in softening it. Rail learned that Dorian had been on Draconis Prime for a contracted mineral delivery, that he had not planned to stay more than 8 hours, and that he currently had a payment pending that he was now worried about collecting. He learned that the outer reaches were roughly 4 transit jumps away, and that each jump needed fuel, and that fuel cost money, and that the Imperial account number Rail had given him would almost certainly be flagged within 24 hours. What do you want? Rail asked finally. It was a direct question, the kind a negotiator used. Dorian was quiet for a moment. To stay alive, he said, same as you. That is not an ambition, that is a minimum requirement. Right now, Dorian said, it's enough. They stopped at Fringe Station Coldo, a fuel and maintenance post at the edge of the Draconis trade corridor, where the station stopped being Imperial and started being everything else. Coldo was loud, poorly lit, and smelled of reactor coolant and fried food, and Rail, hidden again under the coat, found himself watching the world through the gap of the lapel with an attention he had never given to anything in the palace. Beings of a dozen species moved through the station corridors, arguing, trading, repairing, resting. No one bowed, no one stepped aside. They pushed past each other and apologized in 4 languages simultaneously and kept moving. A pair of small children, one human, one of a species Rail did not immediately recognize, were chasing each other around a cargo pallet, while someone who was presumably a parent yelled at them from 3 stalls down. It was chaotic and loud, and nothing about it was arranged for anyone's convenience, and Rail could not stop looking at it. Dorian found his contact quickly, a wide, heavyset human named Bren with grease-stained hands and a very large smile. Bren ran a repair bay near the docking arm and seemed to have known Dorian for years, in the easy way of people who do not see each other often but always end up at the same kind of trouble. Dorian said he needed a fuel top-off, a quick check on the secondary engine coupling, and to be gone before anyone official noticed he was here. Bren did not ask any follow-up questions. He just started working and quoted a price that Dorian accepted without negotiating, which meant it was fair. Rail watched this and filed it away. No contract, no sigil, no enforcement mechanism, just 2 people who trusted each other because of a history he was not part of. Bren found him, eventually. He was checking the overhead panel near the co-pilot's seat when the coach shifted and one small golden eye blinked up at him. Bren looked at Rail for a long moment. Then he looked at Dorian. Then he went back to the panel. You've got 3 Imperial intelligence ships doing circuits around this station's outer lane, he said, as if this were a minor weather observation. Silver Scale officer running the search. She's asking about a cargo hauler matching Belinda Mee's profile. How long before she gets to the dock records? Dorian asked. I'd say 40 minutes if she's efficient. I can give you a fake reactor fault to explain the delay. Buys you maybe 25 more. Do it. Bren did it. He did it with the ease of a man who had been manufacturing plausible mechanical problems for a long time, and Dorian moved the Belinda Mee out of dock, while the silver-scaled intelligence officer on the outer lane was still sorting through falsified diagnostics. They jumped before the window closed. In the silence of transit space, Rail sat with his claws folded and thought about what he had seen. A human asking for help with no authority behind the request, another human giving it with no certainty of reward. The whole exchange had taken less time than a single palace briefing. The one called Bren, Rail said, he did not have to help you. No, Dorian agreed. Why did he? Dorian considered it seriously, which Rail was beginning to notice was something the human actually did, rather than simply answering fast. Because last year I helped him move some cargo off the books when he was in a bad place financially, and because he doesn't like Imperial checkpoints on principle. He paused, and maybe because he's a decent person. Rail looked out at the starfield. He had no category for that last one. He was going to need one. The Pelly's corridor had a reputation. Pilots called it the graveyard lane, not because people died there, though they did occasionally, but because of the derelict freighters. Hundreds of them, drifting in the dark between 2 dead stars, old hulks from collapsed shipping companies and abandoned salvage operations, turning slowly in the silence. From a distance, they looked like bones. Dorian had flown it before. He knew where the gaps were between the wrecks, which ones still had live power cells that would confuse a scanner, and exactly how cold and dark the Belinda Mee could run before the life support started complaining. He was thinking about all of this when Sova's warships dropped out of transit space directly ahead. There were 2 of them, long and narrow, the Imperial design, built to look like something about to strike. They came out of the jump at a spread that blocked both clean exit vectors, which was professional and deliberate, and the communication request came through before Dorian had finished processing what he was looking at. He accepted it. The officer on the screen was silver-scaled, with close-set amber eyes and the expression of someone who is very good at her job and is not particularly enjoying it. She identified herself as Sova, Intelligence Division, acting under authority of the new Lord Regent. She said the words Lord Regent the way someone says a word they have been told to use but do not fully believe. The human known as Dorian Vance, she said, is ordered to stand down and prepare for boarding. The hatchling in his custody is to be returned unharmed to Imperial care. Rail, who was sitting on the co-pilot seat in full view of no cameras, because Dorian had already angled the screen, went very still. Dorian looked at Sova. He breathed once. Then he said, I think there's been a miscommunication. I don't have any hatchling. I have a cargo of mineral compounds and a faulty coupling on my secondary engine that's been giving me trouble since Coldo Station. I'm just trying to make my delivery. Sova's expression did not change. We have a scan signature match on your vessel. These old haulers all read the same, Dorian said pleasantly. I can give you my manifest if that helps. He sent it. It was genuine. It was also for a delivery run that now made no geographic sense given his current position, but the manifest itself was clean, and making an officer wade through paperwork was always worth 30 seconds. While Sova's people processed it, Dorian opened a secondary channel buried under the communication traffic and started calling in debts. The Pelly's brokers were not an organization. They did not have a charter or a leader or a headquarters. They were a collection of people who lived and worked in the corridor, who moved goods quietly and asked few questions, and who had a collective distaste for imperial tariff enforcement that bordered on philosophical. Dorian had hauled freight for them, shared route data with them, and once helped one of their pilots out of an impound situation on a border station. He had never asked for anything back. He asked now, one message, short, the whole story in 5 sentences, because 5 sentences was all the time he had. Vayek killed the Dragon King, the heir is alive, Sova is hunting us, I need a distraction, not a fight. He sent it and went back to his conversation with Sova. He stalled for 9 minutes. He asked clarifying questions about the warrant. He expressed concern about the correct legal procedures for boarding a licensed cargo vessel in disputed corridor space. He mentioned twice that he had a delivery window and asked whether the Empire would be compensating him for the delay. Sova answered each question with the patience of someone who has made peace with humans being exactly like this. Then the brokers arrived. 6 ships, different sizes, different owners, appearing from different directions out of the freighter graveyard, and not one of them was armed in any meaningful way. What they did instead was this. One of them broadcast a distress signal on the Imperial emergency frequency, citing a reactor breach. 2 more began moving in ways that looked erratic and dangerous on a scanner. A 4th started transmitting a looped cargo dispute filing that flooded Sova's communication bandwidth. The 5th and 6th just positioned themselves between Sova's warships and the Belinda Me in a way that was not technically illegal, but was absolutely in the way. Sova turned to deal with it. She had to. A reactor breach signal could not be ignored. Dorian cut engines, all of them. He shut down everything non-essential and took the Belinda Me dark, drifting on the momentum they had, sliding sideways and slow into the field of wrecks. Inside the ship, the light went to emergency red. The recycled air tasted stale immediately. Rail said nothing. He watched Dorian work and said nothing. They drifted for 3 hours. At one point, in the middle of the 2nd hour, Rail said, "Those people helped you, the ones in the corridor." "Yes," Dorian said quietly. "You had no way to force them." "No." "Then why?" Dorian was quiet for a moment, the way he got when he was choosing words rather than just producing them. "Because I told them the truth," he said. "Vayek murdered a king and is hunting a child. That's the kind of story people respond to." Rail looked at the dark viewport, full of drifting wrecks and cold stars. He had spent his whole life in a palace built on hierarchy, where things happened because someone with power told someone without it to make them happen. The idea that truth by itself could move people, that you could say what was real and have strangers in a lawless corridor risk their ships for you, sat in his chest like something warm that he did not have a name for yet. "They did not know me," he said. "No," Dorian agreed. "They knew the situation. Sometimes that's enough." Sova lost their trail. A coded message found them as they crept out the far end of the corridor. Loyalist dragons were gathering at a world called Ardanvast. Vayek knew it too. Whatever was going to happen next would happen there. Dorian set the course. He did not ask Rail's permission. Rail did not correct him. Ardanvast was the color of an old bruise. The planet came up on the viewport as a dark violet mass, covered in cloud bands the color of slate, with mountain ranges cutting through the lower atmosphere like broken teeth. It was cold and wind-scraped and had nothing on it worth mining or farming or building a trade port around, which was exactly why the Loyalists were there. Dorian brought the Belinda Me down through heavy turbulence, following a landing beacon that had been broadcast on a frequency so old and obscure it barely existed in current navigation charts. The landing site was a natural bowl between 2 ridgelines, sheltered from above and invisible from orbit unless you knew the exact angle to scan. Rail watched the camp appear below them as they descended. Tents, equipment shelters, the dark shapes of dragons moving on the ground. Not an army. A remnant. The reaction when they landed was not warm. A dozen dragons surrounded the ship before the boarding ramp finished extending. They were soldiers, older ones, with the kind of stillness that came from years of discipline, and they looked at Dorian the way people look at something they do not trust and cannot categorize. A human, landing here, with a child-sized gold-scaled hatchling walking down the ramp ahead of him. One of the soldiers said something in the old court tongue, which Rail understood and Dorian did not. The translation was approximately, The human brought the heir as bait. We should hold him separately while we confirm the hatchling's identity. Rael said, in the old court tongue, the phrase for "I heard that," and the soldier went quiet. Elder Myra came out of the largest shelter, and the camp changed around her the way weather changes before a storm. She was ancient, her scales the deep amber of old tree resin, her wings folded close with the careful precision of someone who had long since stopped using them for anything but emphasis. She had been his father's chief counsel for 40 years. She had sat in the room when Rael was named heir. She had argued his case before 3 different clans before he was old enough to speak. She looked at him for a long time, then she looked at Dorian. Then she said, in plain trading tongue so the human could follow, "Everyone stand down, both of them are guests." The soldiers stood down. The word guests had a weight in dragon culture that translated roughly as "under my protection, and if you test, that I will make you regret it at length." Dorian, who had stood at the bottom of the ramp through all of this, with his hands visible and his expression very neutral, let out a breath that was too controlled to be called a sigh. Myra took Rael inside. She gave him food and warm water, and she sat across from him in the shelter, and she did not say anything comforting. She asked him what he had seen in the palace. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was more than most adults had ever given him. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she told him what surviving was not enough. She told him about the Iron Conclave, the assembly of the 12 great clans, the only body in Draconis tradition that could formally recognize a king's successor. Without their recognition, Vayek's claim would hold legally, because law did not care about what was true, only about what was documented and witnessed and sealed. Rael needed to return to Draconis Prime. He needed to stand in front of those 12 clans and be named. "I am 12 years old," Rael said. "Your father was 11 when he was presented," Myra said. "Age is not the question. The question is whether you can stand up and tell the truth in a room full of people who are being paid to doubt you." Rael did not answer. He went out and found Dorian sitting on a supply crate near the edge of the camp, looking at a map of the site and making small marks on it with a piece of chalk. He had not been invited to do this. No one had asked him. He had simply picked up the chalk and started. "You're doing something," Rael said. "Thinking," Dorian said. He did not look up. "This camp has 3 bad angles. If someone comes from the North Ridge, they can hit the main shelter before the sentries on the east perimeter even see them. And there's a flat stretch on the south approach that a troop carrier could land on if they timed the wind right." He paused. "I'm thinking about what to do about that." "You are a cargo hauler." "I'm a cargo hauler who has been chased by Imperial warships for 4 days," Dorian said, "which means I've been paying a lot of attention to how they move." Rael looked at the map. He looked at the marks. They were not random. They were precise, measured by eye but careful. "You could leave," he said. "You have delivered me. You have done what was asked." Dorian finally looked up. "Nothing was asked," he said. "An old woman shoved you into my coat. That's different." "Then you could still leave." "I could," Dorian agreed. He looked back at the map. "I'm going to fix the south approach problem first." That night, Vayek's scouts hit the ridge. It was a probe, not a full assault, meant to confirm the camp's location and count the defenders. They hit the north angle exactly as Dorian had predicted. The sentries held, but everyone in the camp understood what came next would be larger. Rael stood in the open for a long moment after the scouts withdrew, feeling the wind off the mountains, feeling the cold that had nothing to do with temperature. He breathed out slowly. A small tongue of fire came with the breath, real fire, not the candle flame he had managed before. It lasted 2 seconds. It lit the ground in front of him orange. Cal, a young dragon soldier nearby, saw it and said nothing, but he stood a little straighter. Rael watched the fire die on the ground. He thought about the conclave. He thought about what Myra had said. He thought about standing up in front of 12 clans and telling the truth. He thought about Dorian with a piece of chalk and no authority and no reason to stay. He went back inside and told Myra he would go to Draconis Prime. The attack came before dawn. Not that Ardanvast had a clean dawn. The sun here was distant and pale, and the mountains kept most of it out until mid-morning. But there was a moment when the sky lightened from black to deep blue, and it was in that moment, when the sentries' eyes were adjusting, that Vayek's troop carriers came in low from the north. Dorian had been awake for 2 hours already. He had spent the night doing 3 things. First, he had found the 3 oldest cargo haulers in the camp, hulks that the Loyalists had used to get supplies in and had not been flown since. Second, he had pulled their navigation cores and rewired them to a remote trigger. Third, he had positioned all 3 of them at the southern edge of the landing flat, facing outward, engines pre-warmed on the lowest possible setting. When the first carrier showed on the ridgetop sensors, Dorian triggered all 3. The old haulers launched. They did not go far. They did not need to. They went up fast and loud in 3 different directions, broadcasting engine signatures that matched active military vessels on SOVA's scanner frequencies. Because Dorian had spent an hour last night studying the scanner codes, he had pulled off the intercepting warship during the Pelly's standoff. 3 signals, 3 directions. SOVA's lead divisions split to pursue all 3. Soldiers who should have hit the camp together came in scattered and from the wrong angles. The Loyalists held the center. Rail fought in the left corridor, the gap between 2 equipment shelters where Dorian had told him specifically that if anyone came through there, shout and delay. He had meant for Rail to shout for backup. What Rail did instead was stand in the gap and breathe fire at the first soldier who came through it. It was not a large fire, but it was real, and it was hot, and it was completely unexpected from a hatchling that Vayek's intelligence had listed as too young to flame. The soldier stopped. 2 more behind him stopped. Rail breathed again, harder, until his chest ached, and the fire was bigger the second time, and the gap held for 4 full minutes until Cal arrived with 3 fighters at his back. Dorian was captured. He had been watching the south perimeter when a unit that had not been in SOVA's main force, a secondary team that had come up a hidden drainage channel on the eastern side, moved through the camp quickly and methodically. Dorian had no weapon that would stop a dragon soldier. He had a multi-tool, a communication device, and a thermos of cold tea. He put his hands up when they found him. They brought him to SOVA. She was running the field operation from the eastern ridge, silver scales, catching the pale morning light. She looked at Dorian with the same focused amber eyes from the Pelly's standoff. Then she looked at the camp, where the Loyalists were holding, where her split divisions were coming back together slowly, where the timeline of this operation was running significantly behind. "You did the decos," she said. "I moved some old ships," Dorian said. 3 signals, 3 directions. My lead units are still chasing ghosts in the upper atmosphere." She said it without particular anger, which was somehow worse than anger. It was the voice of someone taking notes. "You are a cargo hauler." "I keep hearing that," Dorian said. She stuttered him. "What is your actual interest in this?" And here Dorian did something that he did not plan and could not entirely explain. He told her the truth, not a negotiating version of it, not a strategic version, the whole unadorned thing. He told her he had been standing at a dock checkpoint waiting for a clearance stamp when an old palace scribe put a frightened hatchling inside his coat. He told her he had not been heroic about it. He had sworn quite a bit in the first hour. He told her Rail had tried to order him around, and he had ignored it, and then something had shifted, and he had stopped being able to look away. "Vayek killed the king," Dorian said. "Then he framed innocent people for it. Now he's hunting a 12-year-old. These are the facts. I would like them to stop being facts. That is the complete extent of my motivation." SOVA was quiet for a long time. She had served the Dragon King for 11 years. She had taken the appointment to Vayek's intelligence division because she had been told, by people she trusted, that the transition of power was legitimate. She had been given specific, carefully selected information about the humans' involvement. She had been told the word kidnapping. She thought about Dorian's face when he said the word frightened. She thought about the signet ring, which her scouts had confirmed was the genuine royal seal found in the hatchling's possession. She thought about the word kidnapping again, and about what a kidnapper with a hostage actually looked like, and about what the man in front of her looked like, which was tired and honest, and mildly irritated, in the way of someone who has been doing the right thing for a week and finding it extremely inconvenient. Inside the camp, Elder Myra was transmitting the heir's genetic record, the signet seal verification, a sworn account from 3 palace survivors, all of it going to the Iron Conclave on Draconis Prime, a formal record, a legal filing, something that now existed in the Conclave's archive and could not be unexisted. Sova looked at the transmission alert on her scanner. She looked at Dorian. She said, "Go." Just that, one word. Dorian went. He did not run. He walked back into the camp at a pace that looked like he had somewhere specific to be, and the soldiers who had brought him in did not follow. Sova pulled her division back to the eastern ridge. She did not call the recall for Vayek. She did not file an updated status report. She stood on the ridge in the pale morning light and made a decision that was not in any of her orders and let it settle in her chest like something heavy and right. The conclave had received the transmission. The legal review was now in motion. Vayek could not stop it without openly breaking the very law he had used to claim power. Dorian found Rail at the edge of the south landing flat, sitting on a rock with his wings half spread to cool down, breathing in slow, controlled pulls after the fight. The Belinda Me had 3 new dents from debris. Everyone was alive. Barely, in some cases, but alive counted. Rail looked at Dorian. He did not say thank you, because Dragon Heirs did not say thank you to cargo haulers in the middle of a battle, but something in his face shifted in a way that meant the same thing. "Draconis Prime," Dorian said. Rail nodded once. They went. The Iron Conclave met inside the volcano. Not metaphorically. The great hall of the 12 clans was carved into the living rock of Draconis Prime's oldest peak, deep enough that the walls ran warm to the touch and the air had a faint mineral taste. The chamber was enormous, built to the scale of full-grown dragons, with the clan seats arranged in a rising curve like the inside of a fist. The floor was polished black stone. The ceiling was open at the center to a column of hot air that rose straight to a vent in the mountain's crown, and through that vent, on clear days, you could see the sky. It was not a room built to make anything feel small. It succeeded anyway. Rail walked in first, ahead of Elder Myra, ahead of Cal, ahead of the handful of loyalist soldiers who had made the journey. He walked slowly, and he kept his chin level, which was something Myra had told him on the transport, in the flat voice of someone issuing a survival instruction rather than a courtesy note. Dorian walked behind him, at the back of the group, in his patched hauler's coat, because no one had told him to wait outside, and he had not offered to. The conclave was already in session. 12 clan lords, enormous and ancient, every color of scale that existed in dragonkind, arranged in their seats with the weight of something that had been doing this for 300 years. They looked at the group entering. Several pairs of eyes settled immediately on Dorian with an expression that fell somewhere between confusion and offense. Vayek was already there. He stood in the central space, copper-scaled and composed, wearing armor that was technically ceremonial but had been chosen to look military. He had prepared a good case. Rail could see it in the way Vayek held himself, the small confidence of a man who has organized his arguments carefully and does not expect to be surprised. Vayek spoke first. He was given the floor because he had requested it and because conclave procedure allowed the sitting regent to address the body before the challenger. He spoke for a long time. He spoke about instability, about the grief of the empire following the Dragon King's death, about the dangerous naivety of a child heir being manipulated by outside interests. He said the word human interests in a tone that was not technically an insult but worked as one. He was very skilled. Several clan lords were nodding before he finished. Then Rail was given the floor. He stood in the middle of the great chamber, small in a way that no amount of standing up straight could change, in a room where every piece of architecture had been built for beings 3 times his size. He looked at the 12 clan lords. He took a breath. He told the truth. He told it the way Dorian told things, without decoration, without strategy. He said what happened in the palace corridor. He said what Dara had done. He He said what it felt like to be placed inside a stranger's coat and to feel the ship lift and to not know if his father was alive. He said when he found out his father was not. He said that slowly, and he did not move past it quickly, because it had happened, and it was true, and running past true things at speed was something he was done with. He said that a human cargo hauler named Dorian had kept him alive across 4 transit jumps, a blockade, a lawless corridor, and a military assault, not because he was ordered to, not because he was paid to, but because he had looked at the situation and decided it was wrong, and that he was not the kind of person who walked away from wrong things. He said he was asking the conclave to recognize his claim not because he was ready, because he was not fully ready, but because what Vayek had done was real, and the only answer to a real wrong was a real response. He stopped, he waited. One of the clan lords asked who would vouch for the heir's account. Rael said, Dorian Vance. There was a sound in the chamber, not quite protest, not quite laughter, something in between, the sound of a room full of very old and powerful beings processing an unprecedented event. Dorian came forward. He stood in the center of the chamber, and the clan lords looked at him. He looked back at them. He answered every question in the same words Rael had used, because they were the same words, because they were what had happened, and he did not add anything, and he did not soften anything, and he did not seem particularly impressed by the room. Sova arrived last. She had come alone, not as Vayek's officer, not as a loyalist, but as a witness. She gave her account in the formal language of Imperial Intelligence Service, documented and precise, and what she documented was the gap between what she had been told and what she had observed. What she documented was Vayek's deception. The conclave deliberated for 1 hour. At the end of the hour, Vayek was removed from the chamber by clan guards. He did not speak on the way out. The recognition ceremony was not long. It did not have to be. Myra spoke the formal words, the seal was presented, and the 12 clan lords each spoke the phrase that had been spoken at the beginning of every reign for 3 centuries. Rael stood still through all of it. He did not shake, which cost him something. Dorian stood at the back of the chamber during the ceremony. He was reviewing in his head whether the payment from the Imperial account had cleared or whether he needed to raise the issue with someone, and if so, with whom, and what the correct protocol was for billing an empire for services rendered. Rael called him forward. Every eye in the room went to the human making his way through the great chamber. Dorian stopped in front of Rael. He looked at the newly recognized heir, small and gold-scaled, and holding himself with the careful stillness of someone who had recently learned what stillness cost. Rael lifted his chin. He spoke in a clear voice, in plain trading tongue so that everyone present could follow. Dorian Vance is named a friend of the Draconis throne, permanent trade passage through all imperial lanes, cleared of any and all laws he may have technically broken in the preceding week. Dorian nodded. The payment, he said. The payment cleared this morning, Rael said. I added 12%. That's generous. That is what it was worth. And then Rael did something that no record in 300 years of Draconis history contained. He lowered his head. A small bow, quick, controlled, the kind a king could make without it costing him anything political and with it meaning everything personal. He came back up fast, his scales flushed deep gold, and he looked somewhere slightly to the left of Dorian's face. The great chamber was completely silent. Dorian looked at the young dragon who had been shaking in his coat 5 days ago and was now standing in the center of an ancient volcanic hall, having just made history. He thought about the cold little weight against his ribs in the dark of the dock. He thought about the signet ring pressed into his palm by small claws. Your scales were cold, Dorian said. Inside the coat, you should eat more. Rael said nothing, but his eyes were very bright, and this time he did not look away. The scribe in the corner of the chamber, who recorded all proceedings, paused with her instrument. She thought about the correct formal language for what she had just witnessed. Then she wrote what she saw. The heir was recognized, the throne was restored, and the human who made it possible stood in the oldest hall in the empire and complained about a dragon's body temperature. She added a note in the margin. It said, "Humans remain, as ever, profoundly difficult to categorize."